Hello, everybody. It's Peter with an I, S-T-A-W-A-R-T. Welcome to segment 6 of, I don't know, the Dark Tower, I guess. In the story, you hear about how Nancy is designing a computer brain. She considers combinations of E, F, and S. There's a very real chance you may think this is the most boring thing in the world. And you're saying to yourself, I'm going to give this thing a few more minutes before I switch to something else. Or you may passively listen, or you may find it interesting. You know, computer programming receives similar responses. It can be the most boring thing in the world, or it has the potential for being interesting. I do a YouTube tutorial about computer programming for people who have never once explored computer programming. You can find it at PIRSViola-1-6, although I would recommend you start out at the beginning with PIRSViola-1-6. And now we continue with, I don't know, the Dark Tower, I guess.
Take the time and energy to plant a new, wiser, better system, which wasn't based on the overly simple combination of F, S, E, and H. She wondered if this is how ancient people who first wondered about organized science, who happened to be ancient philosophers, started out. She always thought they were stupid for believing that everything was made of combinations of earth, wind, and fire. Everybody knows that things are composed of a few dozen elements. All the ancient philosophers had to do was look at the periodic table of the elements to know that. The volume of pain in Nancy's mouth had been impossible to ignore all day, but now it was becoming impossible to bear. She let out a huff. Working on the computer was useless. To take her mind off her bad tooth for a while, she decided to hobble up the road and make a phone call. She had spilled some hot coffee on her sweatpants and decided to change into something else before she left. It was an unpleasant surprise to find that the pair of jeans that had fit her so beautifully just a few short months ago had become nearly impossible to button. The other clothes she brought along smelled musty, so she stuck with the sweats. She wondered if maybe she needed to start wearing maternity pants on backwards. Chapter 6. Nancy got out of the taxicab and waved as she said, "Thanks." "Hey, you have to pay me," yelled the taxi driver. Nancy had forgotten about that part. Little detail. She gave him a few bills and turned to decide which entrance to the dentist clinic she should use. The word clinic was misleading, and for a purpose. The sprawling structure of metal, glass, and stone was the size of a small mountain, and it dealt with every branch of medical science and research. But buildings called hospitals get sued quite a bit more than buildings called clinics. It's the same sort of savvy contractors use when they build country cottages. Country cottages the size of Monticello, with marble columns out in front and an elevator to the top floor. The owners could escape the higher tax of owning a permanent residence by listing their house as a country cottage, as long as they keep a small stack of firewood next to their house. Strangely enough, instead of bureaucrats saying, "Wait, this is no country cottage. You live next to one of the Seattle Sonics. And with the size of your garage, you could run a car dealership. And you have an indoor elevator." They allowed residents to start an ordinance that dictated nobody in these neighborhoods could stack firewood next to their house. As Nancy walked inside the cover of chain link fencing, she felt quite pleased, having stumbled upon the ad in the phone book telling her about the free dentistry this place was offering. The taxi ride there and back was more than she wanted to pay. She wondered why the chain link fence had been set up this way, like a protective shelter as people made their way from the parking lot to the front doors. She wondered if there were some attack dogs running around. Nancy knew that if she were mauled by a ferocious animal in front of the clinic, she would sure be in the right place. Nancy would have had the taxi driver drop her off so she could go directly to the front desk, located in the front of the building. But this place was sort of like the Pentagon. There really isn't a front or a back door to the Pentagon. The Pentagon was constructed that way, with a sign on every door, reading, "Front desk that way." In case of invasion, hostile forces would say, "Okay, let's attack from the front." And during the attack, there would be all sorts of confusion, and soldiers would run laps around the place, until they got tired and went home. Fortunately, after talking to somebody at an information desk, there was no confusion about which way she had to go for her dentist appointment. The opposite side of the building, it was sort of like walking in the door of a casino at one end of Las Vegas and trying to make it past all the main doors and through all the connecting hallways to get to the other side of Las Vegas, all in one day. A few times, Nancy wondered if she should lay in the hallway and pretend like she was dead in order to get a gurney ride in the direction of the morgue, bringing her closer to her destination. But instead she pushed on. About 6 months ago, she would have walked the distance with no problem. The fact that she was completely out of shape was hitting hard. When she got to the elevator leading up to the office floor she was headed for, she was kicking herself for not going with her idea of playing possum, because the elevator she needed to ride also went to the morgue. She could have been wheeled down there, got up, and rode directly to her destination without having to walk more than 20 paces. But going by the morgue could lead to an embarrassing situation. After all, she was a pretty young girl who would appear to be very, very vulnerable. And the morgue could be a pretty lonely place sometimes. She would hate to have to rebuff somebody and admit that she was alive. It was nice to relax in the waiting room chair after she had gotten there. She hoped that the perspiration on her face and back would be given a chance to evaporate before she went in to see the dentist. But no, the dentist could see her almost as soon as she picked out a magazine. "Hi," he greeted her with a smile. Nancy couldn't believe it. It was her old dentist, the one she had since she was little, the one who would never let her keep her baby teeth. Evidently, he had moved out of his humble clinic into what was called by the surrounding residents the brownstone. They called it the brownstone because, well, it was covered with brown stone. The dentist didn't own the whole thing. There was a group of investors that backed him, but he certainly had the run of things, and his working quarters were located at the top of the highest tower, like a cherry on top of a big scoop of ice cream, which sounded so good to Nancy at that moment. It was clear that he didn't recognize her at all. Nancy decided that he had forgotten who she was, simply because he had so many other patients he had to deal with. The dentist thought Nancy looked familiar, like one of the old patients who would always get upset about not being able to keep her baby teeth. But that former patient was a lean, neat person, not at all like the sweaty Betty standing before him now, wearing pants that were dirty when she left the house that morning. "Right this way," he said politely. They went into the OR. This was the room where the dentist performed orthodontia and other dental procedures. Hence the name. It was the orthodontia room. By the way, to save Europeans the time of looking through their dictionaries, orthodontia is a field of dentistry that deals with straightening teeth in order to make them not scary.